Good evening, everyone. My name is Shelley Ambrose. I'm the Executive Director of the Walrus Foundation and the publisher of the Walrus magazine. Welcome to TD Presents the Walrus Talks Cities of Migration. I would also like to say that we're here in Surrey, but we're also on the unceded land of the Coast Salish people. Beautiful place to be, gorgeous day today. It's the first time we've brought our national series of the Walrus Talks here. Bit of a pilot project for us coming to Surrey. We're very happy to see you. Thanks for coming out. We are learning a lot about this, Canada's fastest growing city. I think the first time I was in Surrey, I was about 12, and man, has it changed. It's unbelievable, very interesting. Hands up if you know what the Walrus magazine is. That's pretty good. Hands up. And don't lie to me. If you subscribe to the Walrus magazine, you are the people I like the best. Those are the people. For those of you who are new to us, the Walrus Foundation is national. It's a charity, it's a nonprofit, and we have an educational mandate to create forums for conversations vital to Canadians, which sounds pretty pointy-headed. We do take our work seriously. We don't take ourselves very seriously. We, of course, make the Walrus magazine. We make a lot of content online at thewalrus.ca. We make Walrus television, which is partly what we're doing here tonight. Each of our 7 talkers will be on Walrus TV with 350 other 7-minute Walrus talkers on different topics. And we do these talks on stages like this from coast to coast to coast. And on all of our Walrus platforms, there are stories and conversations about politics, the arts, culture, environment, business, technology, cities, the West, the East, the North, youth leadership, creativity, water, vice, spirituality. We got it all going on. We're not left-wing or right-wing because you all know that a walrus has no wings. There are no wings. We are an independent entity with no owners and no one point of view. So wherever you're from coming here tonight, you're in very good community and very good company, because if you're here, that means you are de facto witty, thoughtful, and curious about Canada and its place in the world. The Walrus Foundation is supported by circulation, advertising, sponsorship, charitable donations, and partnerships. There's no way we can do the work that we do without our partners. And one of our greatest long-standing partners is TD. They've been supporters of our work since our early days. We're 13 years old. We're a bit of a pilot project ourselves. And TD has been committed to strong, diverse communities across this country and have made significant investments to help those communities thrive. Please join me in welcoming TD's District Vice President, TD Business Banking, Fraser Valley Commercial Banking Center, longer title than mine, our friend Bill Cunningham. Come on up here, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, Shelley. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are in the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, made up of many nations, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Great honor to them. So good evening, everyone, and thanks once again, Shelley, for the nice words on behalf of TD. And on behalf of my colleagues at TD, I'm delighted to join all of you here as the presenting sponsor of this evening's Walrus Talks, Cities of Migration. It's a wonderful feeling to be surrounded by so many people this evening who I believe are committed to the ongoing dialogue around the future of Canada's cities and the opportunities and issues that we should and must embrace when thinking about how migration shapes our cities, expands our cultural landscape, and how it has the ability, and this is the important piece for us bankers, to create business development opportunities for all of us, right here in Surrey, the Lower Mainland, and for that matter, all across Canada. And at TD, it's our opinion that thought leadership events like the Walrus Talks evenings can only serve to help bring stimulating debate, increased attention, and more frank discussion on the topic of immigration and cities and all that it encompasses. And tonight's subject is truly a great fit for us at TD. We've long been committed to celebrating cultural diversity, reaching out to new Canadians, and supporting our visible minority communities. I'm thrilled that tonight's event is being held right here in Surrey, a community vitally important to TD and a community that embraces all of these aspects. Now, While this is my very first Walrus Talks event, TD's been a long partner, as Shelley said, of the Walrus. And as an organization, we understand that there is a unique opportunity for large corporations to support the important educational initiatives of organizations like the Walrus, a partner that we believe is not only responsive to the needs of its own readers, but a partner that continually seeks to educate the broader community on the challenges that many people face in access to value-add information and enabling real point-of-view thought leadership discussions. And you know what? We think you at the Walrus are doing it marvelously. We're very proud to be partnered with you. And I'm also thrilled to advise that as part of Canada's upcoming sesquicentennial celebrations, TD will be working even closer with the Walrus as an official corporate sponsor of the Coast to Coast Walrus Talks events throughout 2017. Now, on a personal note related to tonight's topic, living here in the Lower Mainland, myself working here in Surrey, I do feel that embracing new immigrants is almost second nature to us here on the West Coast. But what I have learned is that it is important to remember that when people migrate to Canada's big cities, it's vital for everyone else to understand that newcomers all have a different and unique story. For some, they come from happier places, but for many others, they are leaving more traumatic situations, and everyone's engagement in their new city will reflect their own personal history. And I've learned that listening, really truly listening to new Canadians, makes them feel more welcome. And personally, I know that I've grown immensely from all these conversations. I encourage all to do the same, and I really look forward to tonight's speakers. So finally, a very big thank you to all the folks at the Walrus. They're extremely hardworking staff who I know, along with these evening speakers, are going to bring us a stimulating evening of reflection and thought-provoking ideas that we can, well, discuss in more detail over cocktails after the event. So thank you all very much. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you, Bill. Bill is the recipient of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal. Congratulations. And I say that because next year is, of course, the 150th birthday of Confederation, anniversary of Confederation. And we are embarking on a national tour with members of the Order of Canada and the Governor General. 13 provinces and territories in 13 weeks. Every province gets one Walrus Talks, and we have chosen Surrey in BC. So as I said, this is our advanced team. We'll be back next year, and hopefully you're going to hear a lot about it between then and now. So thank you, Bill, and thank you, TD, for tonight, for everything you do, and for next year. I also want to thank Surrey 604, our local partners here, for their friendship and support. As I said, we've produced more than 50 of these. In fact, I think tonight is our 60th Walrus Talk, and we've been to cities big and small, and we talk about all kinds of topics when we do the Walrus Talks: climate, the Arctic, human rights, destiny, performance, philanthropy. Tonight's about cities of migration. The costs, challenges, benefits, and realities of human migration is our shared history, our current reality, and our collective future. And diversity in all of its forms at the Walrus means a diversity of perspective, and you will hear tonight 7 very different perspectives on cities of migration. Here's how it works. I do not pop up like a jack-in-the-box and introduce each of our speakers to you. You have a program in your hand. It is in speaker order. If you flip it over, their bios are on the back, so please follow along. That's why we leave the lights up. And as I said, we're also making Walrus TV, so we need the lights to get the speakers so we can make their videos. You will see in here 7 speakers in a row, and an hour from now, we'll all go out there in the lobby and have a lot to talk about over a cocktail and a piece of food. So just before I let them get underway, I'd like to thank our speakers in advance. We're very grateful to each, all volunteers. So thank you to the founder and publishing director of New Canadian Media, formerly with the Times of India and a Nieman Scholar at Harvard, our dear friend George Abraham, who's come to us from Ottawa tonight. Actor, author, and playwright Carmen Aguirre, whose new excellent book is called Mexican Hooker No. 1. Her first book was shortlisted for the Charles Taylor Prize. I'm sure this one will be too. I hope I didn't jinx it. University professor, and most recently the author of Brown, Kamal Al-Solaylee, who lives in Toronto but had a long way of getting here from Yemen. Managing Director, Social Policy and Projects, City of Vancouver, Mary Clare Zak. She had to do the traffic to get here tonight. That's kind of a journey. The CEO of S.U.C.C.E.S.S, Queenie Chew, who is from right here. Well, not really, but nearby. And the principal at Bing Thom Architects, who has designed your library and the SFU campus, Surrey Centre Library, Michael Heeney. And Surrey's own top 25, under 25 rappers, Rick Big Love Kumar and Kalvonix Choo. Thank you all for coming. Let's begin. Go, Kamal.
Good evening. My name is Kamal Al-Solaylee, and I'm going to talk to you today about a word and a place that not a lot of people like to acknowledge or discuss. And this is part of a project that I'm actually working with the Walrus magazine on. It's going to be a feature and a book. So you're my test audience. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, please feel free to come and talk to me. So my title is In Defense of Ghettos, and in 7 minutes I'm going to ask 7 questions, and I'm try to give you some responses. My first question is, why is ghetto such a difficult word and place? There's no denying that when we hear the word ghetto, we do feel somehow uncomfortable. I don't blame you, I don't blame myself, I don't blame anyone for feeling that way. It has its origins is actually from Italy, from the word ghetto, and it's become a word that has become associated with a long history of anti-Semitism. It obviously developed over the centuries and ended up in the Holocaust. In North America, we actually associate the term largely with the African American community and the segregation, housing segregation. So as you can see, a word that's come to us through anti-Semitism and the aftershocks of slavery is now one that we are very keen to preserve or replicate. We think of poverty, isolation, crime, alienation, and maybe even guilt. So that's why it's such a difficult word. So my second question is, where are today's ghettos, and how do they differ from ethnic enclaves? We like to think that we don't have ghettos anymore, but that's not true, actually. Ghettos exist. They do in reserves, they do in refugee camps in Europe. We may not always call them that. We've always found some euphemism and ways around them. My favorite one actually is from Toronto. We call them priority neighborhoods. Perhaps the most remarkable among them is the rise and fall of the gay ghetto, the gay neighborhood, where members of the LGBT community will come together, play, sometimes work in part of town where they felt safe. As that community expanded and has become more accepted in mainstream society, the need for a ghetto has abated. Today's ghettos are not just in inner cities anymore, but at least not in Canada's bigger cities like Toronto and Vancouver, because the real estate boom have forced out and priced out entire communities from city cores. We talk about the cities of migration, and the racialization of poverty and precarious work mean that the working poor largely come from ethnic and migrant community. They work in the city, but can only afford to live on its margins, sometimes cut off from the core by bad transportation options. If you're doing a little bit better, then you can afford a car, then you opt for a suburban living. But the question I want to ask you, is a fancier car-dependent ghetto any more or any less of a ghetto? Have we just upgraded the idea of ghetto and created a two-tier version, one in inner city and one in the suburbs, or in large cities? So why do we fear ghettos? There's no denying that ghettos have become a kind of a parking space for our collective anxieties about race and racially based economic disparity. Again, the migrant experience. We've projected our worst fears into poorer ghettos. They're places where the black male body prevails, and we sometimes think of brown extremists. The ghettos are places where mainstream institutions, whether it's policing, education, social services, are at a disadvantage. They're outnumbered. Other languages and other ways of life dominate here. The state is not in control. Cultures from home countries are. Ghettos and ethnic enclaves are barometers, the ultimate test of how we really live with the other, even when, statistically speaking, the other is no longer an oppressed or a small minority. So why do we try to transform or tear down ghettos? You've heard words like mixed income neighborhoods, gentrification. The truth of the matter is that in inner cities bound by green belts or water or other kind of restrictions, ghettos where largely migrant communities have been left to fend for themselves and where housing projects for the working poor have been falling apart are suddenly desirable. It's all about location, location, location. So, gentrification in mixed income neighborhoods are the only way that cities like Toronto, for example, can expand and still not fall for urban sprawl. A ghetto, once shunned, is now a geographically desirable arena for social entrepreneurs and speculators. So who loses when we erase ghettos? And I'm going to answer, just in the interest of time, question 6 as well, and who wins? Well, who loses is not just the people who once lived in them. As rents increase and gentrification builds up, a kind of flight happens. I call it black and brown flight, and they fly further into the outskirts. What happens with migrant communities is that our connection to the city is lost. A whole history, way of life, stories, community roots disappear. In places like Brooklyn or Harlem particularly, black residents and black history are being brushed out of the picture, whitened through hipsters or browned through a more upwardly mobile Hispanic community. There's a loss of collective wisdom and the threat of communities being dispersed, thinned out. I worry about that because with every community that's been erased, a history is being wiped out at the same time. I understand that community is a fluid word. Places people come and go. We seed grounds for highways, for subways, for the greater good, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's what's happening here. Who wins? This is not going to be a diatribe about development or condo developers or anything like this, but I don't think anybody actually wins, in my opinion, when we erase ghetto, because among other things, we validate seeing the ethnic and working poor as categories of people in need of either salvation or exile. My final question is, why should you care about all of this stuff? I don't live in a ghetto, but why should I care about it? I care about it because for most residents in ethnic enclaves or ghettos, the place where they live is a point of reference, is a path to identity, and even to a point of view towards being Canadian. I teach in a university in downtown Toronto where I supervise the education of both the privileged and the marginalized. And I can tell you that the next generation will have completely different stories about what Canada is. And 150 years from now, it'd be a completely different narrative from the one we're going to celebrate next year. And I think that's a good thing. The face of Canada is changing, and so should its narrative. One place where these narratives are happening is the ghetto. One place where these narratives may cease to exist is the gentrified or demolished ghetto. Put simply, you can't tell new stories when your history has been erased. Thank you so much.
Good evening, I'm Queenie Chew. I'm the CEO of S.U.C.C.E.S.S, which is one of the largest nonprofit social services agency in BC. Through our work internationally across Canada and in BC, and also right here in Surrey, one of our country's fastest growing municipalities, we have supported the settlement and integration of immigrants and refugees over the last 43 years. My topic is Beyond the Keys to a Successful Welcome. BC has historically been and continues to be a popular destination for newcomers to Canada. In the first 6 months of this year, BC already has welcomed over 23,000 new immigrants and refugees. And many of these newcomers, particularly refugees, have made Surrey their new home. It is estimated by year 2018, around 50% of Surrey's population will be newcomers. And last year, almost a quarter of government-assisted refugees destined for BC chose to settle in Surrey. So while settlement and integration is a long journey, refugees and newcomers are highly resilient and show tremendous courage and strength. With the appropriate community supports in place, they achieve phenomenal outcomes. We've all heard about notable Canadians who came to this country as refugees, such as Minister Mariam Mosself or former Governor General of Canada, Michelle Chong. Refugees also make significant contribution to our economy. For example, a recent study by Vancouver indicates that over the next 20 years, Syrian refugees, in fact, will generate over $560 million in local cumulative economic activities here in BC. Refugees are also highly entrepreneurial. Of private incorporated business owned by immigrants in Canada, 11% are owned by those who came as refugees, which is just slightly less than 12% owned by those who came under the business class. The children of refugees also achieve great success. A national study of the educational outcomes of children immigrants found that high school graduation rate of government-assisted refugees is over 90%, and the university completion rate is about 29%, which is higher than some who came under other immigrant classes, and those who are third-generation Canadians or higher. When we think about successful integration of refugees or newcomers, we got to understand the factors and conditions that will help both refugees and newcomers, as well as the host communities, be successful. These include broadening our lens to think beyond the initial welcoming stage that we often see in the media. No doubt, the initial stages of settlement are important, and we must invest the required resources into services that provide essential information and resources for refugees to achieve settlement. But we must also deeply understand the next steps that ensure social inclusion of refugees and newcomers. This encompasses not only their sense of belonging, but also fostering that active participation of refugees and immigrants into the social, civic, economic, and cultural fabric of the community. This requires two-way streets. That includes adjusting our approach as well as accepting and recognizing, valuing those newcomers and refugees' important role and contribution to the community. The social inclusion of all newcomers into our community obviously is very important as it supports the vision of a diverse, inclusive, and harmonious Canada for all. To achieve this vision, I would like to raise the following points for you to ponder. While we heard so much about the inspirational stories of refugees and newcomers setting up businesses and employers coming forward with job opportunities, the continual support of businesses is needed to ensure economic integration of refugees and newcomers. We need more businesses to offer refugee jobs, at least at a living wage, that allows them to support their families. In addition, Business must also be supported to better integrate refugees and newcomers into the Canadian workplace, which can pose its own set of unique challenges. Many refugees, particularly those of very low English proficiency, require not weeks or months, but years of language training to achieve a basic level of English proficiency. That would enable them to get higher paying and stable jobs and more actively engage with their communities. For women, language training is needed to ensure they're able to communicate with healthcare providers, access parent support services, and establish relationships with their neighborhoods. Long-term and stable investment by government is needed to increase service providers' capabilities to deliver more language training. As many of you know that the recent the government-assisted Syrian refugees in BC are young, and many of them are part of large families. Almost half of the Syrian government-assisted refugees in the province are between the age of 0 and 12. Family programming is needed to support both parents and children, particularly as they experience and negotiate complex pressures from settlement, family, and trauma. The community needs to recognize complex pressures, to recognize the complex internal and external pressures on refugees' families and support them to build positive relationships, not only within the family, between parents and children, but also between family and the community. We also need governments and decision makers to invest in community connections, programs that celebrate diversity, as well as anti-racism programs. We need funding for programs that share best practices with employers, service providers, and police on how to actively include newcomers into their structures, to ensure that they are able to gain that knowledge and skill on how to sustain, and also a healthy and inclusive communities that are free of racism, hate, and fear of ourselves and the successive generation we are accountable to. Obviously, we have lots of work going forward. We know that more refugees are coming to Canada, and many will be arriving in the coming 2 to 3 months, in fact. Refugees and newcomers make significant social, cultural, economic contributions to Canada. And research has clearly demonstrated that newcomers are needed to support the continued growth of our country. The successful integration of newcomers goes beyond the initial welcome. Rather, it's about the social inclusion of newcomers into all realms of community life in order to build a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive Canada for all. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Clare Zak, and I want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. My talk is about our collective migration story, and I'm going to start by sharing a story with you. The year is 1937, when a 14-year-old boy named Frank leaves a harsh and impoverished life in Czechoslovakia and emigrates to Canada with his mother, brother, and sister. Decades later, Frank repeats many stories about this epic-like voyage, and in minute detail to his children and his grandkids. The 2-day trek to France, 10 days by boat to Montreal, another 4 days by train to BC, and predictably, he boasts that he defied the odds and was the only one on that ship that didn't get seasick. But he also admits hardships of adjusting to life in Canada, of being unable to speak English, giving up his education, loneliness, discrimination, and how all of this eventually takes a toll on his mental health. 50 years after Frank's arrival, a young woman steps up to her booth at the Vancouver International Airport. An immigration officer, she welcomes newcomers to Canada, immigrants, refugees, and those seeking asylum. She witnesses families reuniting, but is most moved by stories from those having no choice but to flee their birthplaces because of war, poverty, or persecution. Later, she helps newcomers to learn English, adapt to life in Canada, and while encouraging local residents to welcome new arrivals. Well, as you may have guessed, Frank was my dad, the young woman was me, and the little girl in this picture was me many, many years ago. So migration has played a huge part in my life and the vocation that I've chosen. But I also believe that migration is a collective story that's really common to all of us. Intense migration of people is happening all around us, and it takes a few different forms. But the vast majority of Canadians now live in urban areas, and most Aboriginal people now live off reserve. Yet 100 years ago, cities were home to less than 10% of us. This migration is rapid, and it's about unprecedented change. It's no wonder that the word migration is rooted in Greek, meaning to change. While change, and particular change as a result of migration, is challenging, I believe that it also presents opportunity for both transformation and reconciliation. Canada is often referred to as a country of immigrants, but the connection between immigration and the colonization of Aboriginal people and the residential school experience is not talked about because it's an uncomfortable topic. But silence only serves to maintain silos that breed ignorance, mistrust, and discrimination, whereas the act of honest conversation allows us to learn, allows us to see and imagine things differently. For me, learning was inspired by something called the Vancouver Dialogues Project. In 2010, while Vancouver welcomed the world to the Olympics, I was privileged to work with Aboriginal, immigrant, and refugee leaders, along with Baldwin Wong, our project leader, to bring these solitudes together. It turned out that a crucial ingredient in making this successful was not about innovation. It wasn't about rocket science either. It was a practice as old as humanity itself, that of sharing personal stories. Storytelling is our oldest form of education. They say that it's essential to all humans. It's also been said that the harder the situation, the more important that storytelling actually becomes. Dialogue sessions brought together hundreds of us across Vancouver in longhouses, mosques, synagogues, and cultural centers. These sessions with no-holds-barred conversation demonstrated how dialogue transforms us. It uncovers truth, challenges stereotypes, shows how we're similar, deepens understanding. For example, we learned that the local First Nations were historically our first welcomers. And yet participants felt that Aboriginal people are in fact made to feel less welcome in Vancouver than immigrants are. We also learned that Aboriginal people may be more open to living among people from different cultures. Most urban Aboriginal participants believe that there is room for a variety of languages and cultures in Vancouver, but just over half of non-Aboriginal participants felt this way. Aboriginal people transitioning off reserves to cities face the same challenges as immigrant newcomers do when they arrive in Vancouver. Racism, loss of tradition and languages, barriers to employment and housing, isolation, and a lack of personal voice in political decision-making. Like immigrants, urban Aboriginal people call Vancouver home, but stay connected to their First Nations lands, which is really integral to strong family and social ties. Finally, Aboriginal people have the same aspirations for themselves as their children as we all do. As it was for my father for me, and as it is for me for my children, education is a top priority and an enduring aspiration for the next generation. The Vancouver Dialogues Project was transformative for many people and for the City of Vancouver. Afterwards, Vancouver became the first city of reconciliation in Canada, and in 2015 committed to implement 27 Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. The City of Vancouver recognizes that reconciliation contributes to the health and wellness of all of our residents and is committed to creating opportunities for people from all backgrounds to have a voice in civic life. So I began this talk with my migration story, and these stories are the foundation of memories and histories of peoples who have taken different journeys to create a home in our cities. Together, we can find a way to talk together and walk together to fulfill our obligations to Aboriginal people at home, as well as our international commitments to welcome refugees. We are the storytellers of the present. Stories can inspire us to achieve a vision of a multicultural Canada that connects all of us to the realities of First Nation, urban Aboriginal, and immigrant communities. They build strong relationships needed to create an enduring, sustainable future for everyone. Rather than separate us, migration is actually our common story. In the words of Chief Robert Joseph, let us find a way to belong to this time and place together. Our future and the well-being of all our children rests with the kind of relationships we build today. Then for our children and grandchildren, all of us will have a much better story to tell together. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Michael Heeney, and I'm an architect with Thom Architects. And I'm going to talk about designing the inclusive city. And when we sort of traditionally, or at least when we used to think about immigrant communities, they tended to be in the inner city. It was, you think of the Chinatown, the Little Italy, or the Little India, but the inner cities now become very expensive. And so when people come here, they can't afford to go to the inner city anymore, and they're actually going to what we call the edge cities, and the kinds of cities like Surrey. And these environments are quite different than the inner city. It's all automobile-oriented. It's much more dilute. You don't tend to see many people on the sidewalk. It doesn't have a lot of character. And so it's a very different environment than those inner city neighborhoods where you kind of bump into your neighbors and you sort of share experiences and learn from each other. And so we started working in Surrey about 20 years ago, and that's when this slide was taken of this central area where we are here today. And when you sort of scratched the surface a bit more and sort of looked into it, you found really the most activity, if you could imagine, sort of pedestrian activity, was happening inside the shopping centers, inside these rather ugly buildings on the outside. But inside, that's where all the people were, and that's where the pedestrian activity was. And we had an opportunity about 15 years ago, or maybe a bit more, to design a new university to go in Surrey. And we were supposed to build it on one of these parking lots out here. And we thought, wouldn't it be interesting that instead of building it on the parking lot, we'd actually build on the little bit of activity that we have here, and we'll actually put it right on top of the shopping center. So we actually found a way to drop the university on top of the shopping center and sort of graft it in front. And so we sort of built on that activity in the shopping center, and we leveraged on it. So the university and the shopping center actually started to create a sense of a city center. And so this is what it looks like, or a piece of it looks like inside. The ground floor here is the shopping center, the old shopping center, but there's 3 levels of university space up above, which have laboratories and classrooms and all of that kind of stuff. And we made, and this is another sort of picture of it. You can see the shops in the bottom and up above. And those corridors serving those classrooms are particularly wide, and they have lots of alcoves. And so immediately kids started hanging out there and studying. And what was interesting, we'd go there sometimes, and they weren't wearing SFU T-shirts. This is Simon Fraser University. They're actually wearing UBC sometimes, and Kwantlen College, and it was attracting people from all over the neighborhood to come and kind of hang out there. And it wasn't just these sort of more intimate spaces, study spaces, but we also created some large spaces which were public and accessible and allowed for kind of informal activities. But also it seemed to inspire people to want to do things. So this was the inaugural concert of the Surrey Symphony Orchestra, which had never done anything before, but they were able to find some space, and SFU, through their generosity, set it up, and they had their first performance right here in this space. And it wasn't just inside we were trying to create spaces. It was very important to us to try and get this activity out. And so we provided outdoor space for people to gather, which really didn't exist in Surrey before this. And sure enough, a few months after we opened, after the building was opened, they had a jazz festival, and all kinds of people showed up. And it was quite interesting because people fell in love with the building, but it also, I think it's raised the confidence of the community. And it was really interesting that the city used to have a coat of arms for their emblem, and they actually changed it to the profile of this building because this is what they started to believe in to represent their community. And a few years later, I should have mentioned this too. This SFU, this is the smallest and newest of the SFU campuses. But it actually has the longest waiting list to get in. You have to have the highest marks to get into this campus. And the kids here have been doing incredibly well. And so a few years later, we had a chance to design the library, which is just down the street. And it's a great time to be designing libraries because, books aren't the same as they used to be. Libraries aren't about the collection anymore. In fact, they're about a lot of things, and they're particularly, from the architectural perspective, they're about space. And it's providing different kinds of space that support different kinds of activities. So if you want to future-proof your library, you actually want to have a whole menu of different kinds of spaces, high spaces, intimate spaces, that will sort of support all of those different kinds of activities. So we had this site, this rather sort of peculiar kind of triangular site that we were given, and we came up with this idea of these sort of interlocked floors, so that sometimes we had double height spaces, sometimes we had single height spaces, and so we were able to sort of provide this menu of different activities or different spaces within this. And we organized it around an atrium. And the building was sort of designed to kind of make you a bit curious, to make you want to come up and circulate around and discover it. And there are lots of places to people watch. You might want to do it on your own, or you could meet a group. And we had lots of little meeting rooms people asked for, so that if they had a business they were running from home, they could actually have business meetings there rather than have to have people come to their home. And we also really wanted to make it a kind of kinetic space, an active space. So every time you came there, it was a little bit different. And so the way we brought the light into the building, the sun tracks around. So depending on the time of the day and the time of the year, it's always a little bit different. And we've provided all of this range of spaces for sort of intimate things, for something where you might sit with a friend. We were really preoccupied with this idea of providing the third space. If home is one space and work is one space, it's that third space. And somewhere perhaps other than a coffee shop for that third space, although we did have a coffee shop in here, as you can see on the bottom. And that's become so important, particularly as people are having to live in smaller and smaller apartments. They need this kind of space to go to. And I'm not sure the librarians around where this was happening, but it was a place for kids to play as well. And these are the high spaces I talked about. So the lower level is the entry, the sort of checkout and all of that kind of stuff. And the upper level is our kind of modern interpretation of the classical reading room. We call it the living room. So it's much less formal, but it's this sort of high, grand space. And it's been wonderful to kind of watch and see how that's being used. In fact, in the morning, the staff do their yoga in this space. And then what we did was, at the ends of these spaces, we've integrated bleacher seating into the stairs. They could actually have performances, different kinds of performances there. And then the room itself becomes a giant amphitheater. So if you have a major civic event, you can actually have thousands of people there. And they can be sitting and they can watch and see all the different activities that are going on. In fact, this is where they had the inauguration for the mayor and council shortly after the building was opened. So we're continuing to work our way through Surrey, and this is the latest building that just literally today broke ground. It's another building for Simon Fraser University. It's their new engineering building, and you can sort of see a big window there, but that's going to have an enormous atrium, which is going to tiers up with 4 floors, full of trees and things. That'll be yet another one of these new spaces to introduce into the city. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm George Abraham, and I'm here to speak to you on the theme of a voice for the voiceless. I must acknowledge Nick Noorani here in the audience because he led me on this journey that I'm on in terms of lending a voice to segments of our population that don't normally get a voice in our discourse. And I didn't really coordinate my presentation with Mike, but I want to use some of what he said in terms of a third space. I want to make the argument that given our rate of immigration and the way our country is changing, we need a different discourse. We need a different conversation. And kudos to Shelley in terms of organizing an event like this, which she takes across the country to foster that kind of a discourse. And I have attended several Walrus talks, and I must say that this is the most diverse audience that I have seen anywhere. So I think bringing it to a city like Surrey is important. And I think cities like Surrey are the Canada of tomorrow. And I want to suggest that what we do at New Canadian Media is emblematic of the change that is happening in Canada right before our eyes. So what I found when I arrived in Canada in 2002 was two media extremes. One is the mainstream, another was the ethnic, and there was no conversation between them. So one was very narrowly cast and the other was too whitewashed. It was trying to not truly relate to the segment of the population that was coming from elsewhere. And we see that, of course, in Surrey, where 41% of the city is foreign-born, 14% have arrived just in the last 10 years, and, of course, a very strong representation of people from India and the Philippines. So what I found was there was no coherent national voice to articulate the sentiment and the aspirations and the perspectives of people who were new to this Canada. And I also thought that there must be some commonalities between the life experiences that we bring as immigrants to Canada. It doesn't matter where you come from, but you share a set of lived experiences. And that's why I launched New Canadian Media about 4 years ago. And I called it immigrant journalism, a journalism that is informed by our lived experience elsewhere and moving from one country to another, but also enables us to relate to immigrants in a better way, to in fact put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and try and experience what Queenie talked about in terms of refugees. If you've lived elsewhere, you've seen poverty, you've experienced corruption, you've stood at a border trying to get in, you know what it means to be in those shoes. And I think as an immigrant, and as we have immigrants across the country writing for us, I think we bring a certain empathy to that scenario. So the premise of New Canadian Media is that this country is changing rapidly, but our media does not reflect the entire reality of the country. And so it's rooted in the idea that there are certain common denominators of immigration that unite all of those who begin life in a new land. It's a different worldview, a perspective that is born out of a lived experience of immigration and their time in another country, most often in another part of the world. This is particularly relevant to communities that are often misrepresented in the media. And of course, a lot has been written about doctors, engineers who have not been able to find their foothold in Canada. I asked myself, and I still remember a conversation with Shelley I had, 3-4 years ago. I said, there must be a lot of immigrant journalists who come to this country and have never, ever written in Canada. And I said, let's try and tap into a network like that. And I must say that some of my most exciting moments in this venture have been talking to participants in our workshops or people who've gone through a mentorship program and said, you just helped me get over depression. Because imagine the mindset of an immigrant journalist who comes to this country and wants to participate in the media landscape of Canada and is not able to. So I've been really fortunate to be able to, I think, network with about 200 people across the country to articulate a different perspective. Obviously, it goes without saying that our newsrooms do not represent the rest of the country. Our newsroom demographics are First, they are dated. There are no studies that accurately reflect the demographics of today, but I think it's safe to say that they do not represent the population that they serve. And what we've been trying to do is to try and bring that different perspective, not only in terms of representing the immigrant point of view, but also offering content for mainstream organizations so that they are more inclusive in the journalism that we do. Very much like, again, what Mike was talking about in terms of inclusive design, trying to look at what we have and trying to do things differently. So in a nutshell, you can come to this country, you can bring credentials, but you find it very hard to get into a newsroom simply because you don't have the experience of having lived in Canada. For example, one of the most common questions you are asked is, have you ever chased a fire truck? You know, it's one of the basics of reporting in Canada, and most often we have not. So there obviously is a lack of representative journalism here in Canada. Like everywhere else, journalists are very good at holding people to account, but we don't spend a lot of time trying to look within our newsrooms and seeing whether or not we are reflecting the Canada that is right before our eyes. Hence, I find that there is a huge disconnect, and I sense that there will probably come a moment when Canada will face its own Brexit moment, when suddenly we will find that we are faced with a reality that we never contemplated ourselves. And I think part of trying to address a scenario like that would be to make sure that our journalism is always inclusive, that it tries to represent every possible perspective that there is. That's why I think New Canadian Media and our effort to portray an immigrant voice in all its color and diversity is so important. It taps into a rich vein of journalism that serves two immediate needs. It reflects the new and emerging Canada with 1 in 5 Canadians born abroad and an equal number of first-generation Canadians. Secondly, we have tried to marshal immigrant journalists to a nonprofit endeavor. There are literally hundreds of them across Canada who've come with high hopes but ended up in dead-end jobs. I know, speaking to many of them, that it's an extremely depressing situation to be in. I've heard this sentiment so often that it rings true. You saved me from depression. Although I know there were lots of journalists who had arrived in Canada, but I'd never worked in a Canadian newsroom, it had not occurred to me how devastating that might be. Now I get it, and I totally get it. Most of them, like me, came from Asia or Africa, where journalism is not for the faint-hearted. It's something that you choose to do, and it's often under extremely oppressive conditions. So we like to be game changers. We like to go against the grain. We take on dictators. We fight for the landless. We defy crime mafias, and hence we bring the same passion to Canada. So in summary, I'd like to say that I think we've been fairly successful in trying to articulate a different perspective in Canadian discourse. We have networked with about 200 writers and journalists across Canada. We are, in fact, trying to launch a series very similar to what Walrus Talks is doing in the immigrant space. We are trying to launch a collective of immigrant journalists in Canada, and I think we want to follow in the Walrus footsteps in terms of enlarging the Canadian conversation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carmen Aguirre. I love dancing, salsa dancing. This may be because I was conceived during Carnival in my father's village of Baiwano in Chile's Elqui Valley. We arrived in Vancouver in 1974, refugees fleeing Pinochet's dictatorship. My parents had brought a couple of cumbia records with them, and those are the ones that were played at the Ukrainian Hall in Chinatown when we held our first dance, a fundraiser for the families of the disappeared in Chile. Those dances were highly politicized. They started with a documentary, followed by speakers and protest music. When the dancing began, it was an opportunity for me to study the adults' pelvises, to deduce who was having an affair with who, based on how closely they held on to each other and to what parts of the body their hands traveled. Who came to these dances? White Canadians from the labor movement and other refugees, such as Palestinians. I also remember a World War II vet, an older gentleman wearing his uniform and giving a formal greeting. This touched me very deeply. As for fellow Latinos, there were a couple of Colombians, one Argentinian, one Mexican. We Chileans were the first Latinos to arrive en masse in this country and the first to publicly introduce what is referred to as Latin music. By the early 80s, Latino dance halls were not only Chilean, but also Guatemalan and Salvadorian. There were traveling bands such as Luis Enrique Mejia Godoy y Mancotal from Nicaragua, who would pack out inner city halls singing danceable tunes for the Sandinista cause. Anarchist punk rockers started to come, Rastafarians too. Local salsa bands were formed, a hall full of people dancing to a salvaged LP, a thing of the past. In the 90s, the Cubans got here. At this point, there were not only Latino dance halls, but also Latino dance clubs. The music was not only cumbia, but also merengue, salsa, and samba at the Brazilian events. Most of the dances were no longer political. In fact, they couldn't be, as the dance hall demographics had changed drastically. Now, you could be an ex-FMLN guerrilla and find yourself dancing with a Salvadorian death squad member, a war criminal. Not only do the political leanings of those at the dance halls now cover everything from the far right to the far left, there are also people of every Latin American nationality and every race found on our continent, with its history of European invasion, African slaves, hundreds of indigenous nations, and immigrants from all over the world. Every social class can now be found at the dance halls and clubs. You can dance with a Mexican international student who is the son of a multimillionaire, and then with a Honduran farm worker who walked here and is still undocumented, sharing a one-bedroom basement with 5 others, working 12 hours a day at an under-the-table job, and sending most of his money back home. The music now also includes reggaeton and bachata, and not only are there people from all over Latin America covering a cross-section of political beliefs, social classes, races, and reasons for being here, and every generation, the youngest 19, the oldest an 80-year-old Haitian gentleman in a linen suit and Panama hat. There are also immigrants from every corner of the globe. The other night, my girlfriend and I danced with recent arrivals from Morocco and Algeria. They come to the Latino Dance Club because, to quote them, the people are warm. They treat you like family. It's like being back home. I've danced with a Serbian refugee, an Iranian who fought in the 1978 revolution, a Congolese socialist revolutionary, a Japanese ballroom dancer, to name but a few. The other night, I was at the dance club with 2 theater friends, one first-generation Canadian of Guatemalan parents, the other first-generation of Chinese parents, and right next to us, a group of mixed heritage young queer women and genderqueers had the time of their life. There are hippies next to hipsters, next to women in wigs, fake eyelashes, gel nails, animal print tube dresses, and towering heels. There are men dancing with men next to women twerking their gangbanger boyfriends covered in tattoos, their boyfriends also twerking them. Anything goes at the Latino Dance Club because everyone there is there for one reason, to dance. And that's all that matters. Okay, so maybe many people are there to get more than just dance action. My conception is a proof of that. Latinx dance halls and clubs in Canada are unique. Notice how I just said Latinx? That's the new word to describe us because it's gender neutral. The reason I adore Latinx dance halls and clubs in Canada is because what happens at them could only ever happen here, nowhere else. If I go to a vallenato dance club in Cali, Colombia, 99% of the people there will be Colombian. The mix of people Canadian Latinx dance halls attract could only ever happen here. And speaking of here, Surrey, I have still to go to one of your Latinx dance clubs. I've heard they're legendary and that babies are being made that are half Latinx and half Punjabi. It's true. The first local Latinx dance hall held in 1974 at the Ukrainian Hall in Vancouver's Chinatown, attended by Chileans, Palestinians, and white Canadians belonging to the labor movement, could only ever have happened here. A baby born of a Salvadorian mother and a Punjabi father who met at a dance hall in Surrey on unceded Coast Salish territory is a child of a city of migration. A city where new immigrants fight tooth and nail for spaces, sacred spaces, spaces that in this case invite you, whoever you are, wherever you come from, to dance, dance, dance. Thank you.
The ties that bonded us together into a home were colored with the paints of flags that I didn't know but learned to love as I grew into a man who had taken a culture that was colorful and vast, which had seen a rich past and which was mine by birthright, but I had not truly seen until I was 6. It wasn't until I was twice that age where I found a page in a book that was in my mother's journal, and then I learned what coup d'etat meant and began to understand the sins of men. Fiji, a land of paradise and tropical breeze, and Fiji water for when the thirst had need, but the water couldn't salve the wound my father felt from leaving his homeland. My mother had felt, knowing that there was no going back, and here they found themselves in a strange land full of cold and snow, racist remarks from shopkeeper lips, so my mother found work at the pantry, working for tips to keep my family afloat. It was strange how an arranged marriage produced me and handed me to a country that was mine to see, to breathe, to fall away in, and to find myself. So I found a pen and I wrote. But the ink had barely begun to dry before the words that shaped my world took flight, and I found that the glasses that nestled onto my nose grew lighter and changed shades and tones, and while my vision declines as the older I get, I now see more than I had back then. Cold and snow shaped my home, but snowmen broke walls and Christmas lights lit up roads like Diwali lamps in the city streets. It was a city that threw parades for holidays I grew up calling my own. And my friends who had foods foreign to me at homes that didn't smell of coriander and curry spices helped me see my perspective was one of many. We didn't know any better. Whether it was in the food we ate or when we were handed books with funny scribbles and my mother's tongue read and made sounds like songbirds on the late afternoons of August. Years later, I can make words appear from beneath my fingertips in 2 languages like a magic trick that millions had mastered but I had only just come to realize. My story was written in 2 inks, one for the culture that gave me life, the other for the culture that opened my eyes, and together like an ice skating duet, they've etched into my book a beautiful story. A story of integration and maturation, a story that was written before my birth and will continue long after my death. This is the story I'm proud to share, a growing fable that is not finished yet.
That was pretty good, man.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Kumar.
I'm Calvin, and we're here to talk about what migration means to us through rap and poetry.
Yeah, specifically how it's shaped our art forms, right? Because I would call myself a poet.
I'm the best rapper of all time.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
But our art is a reflection of our reality.
Like a great man once said, Ice Cube.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I have to quote Ice Cube.
Yeah.
It's not a good presentation unless you do that. But with that being said, our realities are shaped by our culture, our cultures and our stories.
Yeah.
And more importantly, it's the experiences that we had growing up, right? My parents came here from Fiji.
And my parents came here from the Philippines.
And listening to their stories, and along with the stories that I've heard through my work with the Syrian refugees, it's helped change how my art comes out, right?
Exactly. So, I grew up, I was born and raised in Surrey, and I've never been to the Philippines. But my parents tell me stories from the Philippines all the time, growing up with no electricity in the village, not having as much as I do today. And it's given me another perspective, just to hear their stories. And it's made me feel thankful for what I do have, be grateful. It's, otherwise I'd just be like a spoiled little rapper, a lot of rappers are spoiled. But, it's taught me to be thankful, it's given me perspectives, and I think it's great because, especially in Surrey, all of my friends, they come from different backgrounds, different cultures. I take their stories, they influence me, and hopefully I influence them. And that's what's great about migration to me.
Yeah, when we hear each other's stories, it helps us break boundaries, right? When we're in a class together and we're inspired by someone else's work, we often go up and be like, hey, that was amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And now I learned something new.
Exactly.
And along with all the other things that we've learned and experienced tonight, I think we should let the audience experience one more.
Okay, sweet. All right. My gift is using words, rhyme, and vibration to express and invest my thoughts on operation. Kalvonix on a walrus, talk on migration. So listen to my art of conversation. Changes at the heart, the start of my presentation. Chose to move places, exposed to new nations. Prone to new gazes, shown to new faces. Loath to stay dormant, change to feel basic. Pains to live the greatest in the place where you give your culture and qualities to make a mark where you live. My parents moved to Canada when they were young kids, brought the Filipino pride so we know that we would strive. I live my life in combination of the values and teachings of a boy who grew up in Surrey, but in a family preaching of old values back at home when daddy didn't have much. In the little old village, no electronics and such. Coming to where I live now in hopes to live a bit better in colder weather, but the warmth is what we put in together. And I believe the change my parents faced in turn changed me. Taught me to be empathetic, respect everyone I see. Always respect other cultures because anyone could be migrating, operating, contemplating like me. Demonstrating a combination of two cultures in one. Shaping the city based on where they are from. It's beautiful. Based on the divine time spent on ways we make things suitable. My identity is splendidly made of things movable. Let me explain to all you people just in case you're confused. Migration gave me two cultures I could straight pick and choose. My parents took the Western world, made it really work. And they gave me parts of places they had been before my birth. Used to think being too nice was less a gift, more of a curse. But it's ingrained on my brain from parents, places, and culture. On top of that, the fact I'm handicapped and walk on metal canes may prove to be a factor that was seen as really strange. So to migrate to Canada was great, I can't complain. And like fellow rapper Drake said, nothing was the same. Thank you.
Yeah, that was good.
Thanks, man.
That was good, yeah.
You're right, you are the greatest rapper of all time. Thanks, guys.
That's what I stick to poetry.
Hearing other stories is what the Walrus Talks is all about. So I want you to, I'm going to ask you to wait to clap until I thank all of our Walrus Talkers. I want to thank Rick, Big Love, Kumar, and Calvin, best rapper of all time, Kalvonix too. That was absolutely fabulous. It's hard, I know it's hard. Let's clap anyway. Okay. If you really want to give yourself 7 great minutes of joy, watch the graduation video of this guy on YouTube. It's quite something. It'll be going up on the Walrus site. It's absolutely fabulous. Excuse me. Thank you, George Abraham. And also, please check out New Canadian Media. It's easy. It's online. You will read things from Canadians, immigrant Canadians, probably your next-door neighbor, people that have come from somewhere else, that you have no idea what perspective they're bringing to the table. It's there. It's amazing. Please check out New Canadian Media. 200 ethnic journalists online. Thank you, George. Carmen Aguirre, her newest book, hot off the press, Mexican Hooker #1. Can I tell them why you called your book this? Or would you like to? Okay. Carmen does many things. One thing she does is act, but she used to get only bit parts that were sort of caricatures, I would say, of being Latino, Latina, and now it's Latinx. Is that it? Sorry, I didn't know that. Latinx. So she was actually once asked to play Mexican Hooker #1. Anyway, this is her new book. Check that one out. Thank you very much, Carmen. You are wonderful. Kamal Al-Solaylee, Brown, also hot off the press. I'm like a traveling circus. All these things that you get to do in your spare time now. Brown is also just come out, and I'm not going to jinx it by saying it will be nominated for things. But Kamal, this is your 3rd book? Second as a writer, 4th as a writer-editor. I'm going to read it on the plane tomorrow, so you guys should read it too. Thank you, Kamal. Queenie Chew, named one of BC's most influential women. Thank you, Queenie, for everything. And Michael Heeney, the designer of buildings that make you curious. I'm never going to forget that line. That is excellent. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our Walrus talkers. There are 8 more Walrus talks this fall across the country, all very different topics, including 3 more in BC. If you want to come on the road with us, we're in Vancouver at UBC talking about Africa, the next generation, on October 18th. In Whistler on October 22nd. In Victoria on October 24th. We're at UVic there talking about youth leadership. You can also join us by live stream, as you know, or you can go backwards in time and now watch more than 350 7-minute Walrus talkers, free and on demand, on our YouTube channel. Our username is Walrus Television, and in a few days, our Walrus talkers for tonight will be up there, and you can share them with your friends who weren't able to be here tonight. We would like you to join us in the lobby for our reception. There's also a table there. Those people that didn't, you people who didn't put up your hands when I said do subscribe, you can do that at the table in the lobby. It will save you time and money. I practically bring it to your door every month, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. We actually do say, well, I say, it's hard to be Canadian if you don't read the Walrus. It's true. I want to thank everyone at TD. There's been a lot of SFU talk today, so I should have also, Bill mentioned that you're the chair of the board of SFU, so there's obviously a lot of exciting stuff going on here. Thank you for tonight. Thank you for being our signature sponsor for our national tour next year, making that possible for us. Thank you to the team at Surrey City Hall and to Surrey 604. Thank you to the Walrus event team, David Leonard and Blair Elliott. There is food and drink at the reception, and if you stay, there will be some good conversation. And after that, good night and safe home. Thank you for coming.